The entire story of Viking mythology begins not with the clang of a sword or the roar of the sea, but with silence, a silence so vast that even the gods had not yet been dreamed. Before there were Viking men rowing longships or Viking women tending hearths, there was only Ginnungagap, the yawning void. It stretched without end, a chasm of nothingness where no bird flew, no river ran, and no sun rose. On one side burned Muspelheim, a land of fire and flame where sparks leapt like living things. On the other side lay Niflheim, a realm of frost, ice, and mist, heavy with a cold so deep it gnawed at the bones of existence itself. Between them, in the gaping gulf, lay the breathless silence where all creation waited. It was here that the first stirring began, not of men or beasts, but of elements colliding. Fire leapt from Muspelheim's heart, blazing like 1,000 suns, while Niflheim exhaled its icy winds, heavy with rime. When heat and frost met in the dark void, the ice began to melt, and from its dripping grew the shape of the first being. His name was Ymir, a giant so vast his limbs could have been mountains, his breath like a storm, his body swollen with the raw might of chaos. From his sweating flesh more beings arose, Jotun of frost, hard and cruel, who spread through the endless dark. Yet life is never born from one alone. As Ymir lay nourished, there came forth another figure, not of flame or frost, but of gentle sustenance. From the frozen rime emerged Audhumla, the great cosmic cow, her udder flowing with rivers of milk that gave strength to Ymir and all his kin. She was no ordinary beast, but the mother of nourishment, the wellspring of survival itself, as sacred to the first giants as Viking food, would one day be to wandering men on long voyages. With her tongue, Audhumla licked the salty ice that rimmed the void, and in her patient labour she uncovered yet another figure, bright and godlike, Buri, ancestor of the gods. From him would come Odin, Vili, and Ve, the three brothers who would shape the worlds. But Ymir, vast and terrible, was not content to rest. From his body dripped yet more life, birthing frost giants that spread across Ginnungagap, their hunger endless, their strength unchecked. The clash between the line of Buri and the brood of Ymir was written in fate from the beginning, a struggle as inevitable as the sea's call to every Viking child born on the fjords. The void that once had no sound now rang with the heavy footsteps of giants, the lowing of the cow, and the first breaths of the gods. Thus, from Ginnungagap, the yawning void, the story of the cosmos unfolded. Fire and ice, beast and giant, god and kin, all emerged from this strange balance between nothing and everything. In this silence, broken by creation's roar, the roots of destiny were sown. It was here that the gods' path toward glory and doom began, and it was here that Viking men and women, centuries later, would find the echoes of their own world, a life carved from hardship, a survival wrested from frost and flame, a story older than memory but never forgotten. This was before the stars, before the sun, before time itself. Yet even in that emptiness, the seeds of Saga were planted, waiting for the world to rise from the blood of a giant and the breath of the divine. From Ginnungagap, the endless gap, came the first heartbeat of Viking mythology, a tale of fire, frost, and fate that no man, god, or giant could ever escape. From the clash of fire and frost, when silence still lingered in Ginnungagap, came the first stirring of life. The sparks of Muspelheim leapt into the icy breath of Niflheim, and where heat kissed frozen mist, the ice began to drip. From these droplets of Thor, heavy with the power of both flame and frost, arose Ymir, the first of all beings. His body was vast, his limbs heavy as mountains, his breath colder than a northern gale, yet burning with the wild chaos of creation itself. He was no man, no god, but a giant whose flesh carried the raw might of both realms. From his form, new lives would spill forth, birthing the race of frost giants that would one day war with the gods. Ymir was fed from the milk of the great cow, Audhumla, who also had risen from the rime of Niflheim. Her udder poured forth 4 rivers of milk, sweet and endless, sustaining the giant's hunger. Without her, even the mighty Ymir would have perished in the void, for there was no Viking food, no harvest, no bread from the earth yet made. As he drank, the sweat of his vast body gave birth to more life. From under his left arm grew a man and a woman, the first of his brood, and from his legs sprang a monstrous son. Thus, without wife or kin, Ymir's very flesh birthed the frost giants, beings as cruel and unyielding as the ice that bore them. Yet even as Ymir grew in strength, Audhumla herself worked tirelessly. She licked the salt from the frozen blocks, and with each stroke of her tongue, the shape of another being was revealed. First hair, then flesh, then a face bright and noble. This was Buri, ancestor of the gods, tall and radiant, unlike the hulking Ymir. From Buri's line would come Bor, and from Bor would be born 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve, whose names would be sung in Saga for ages. While Ymir's children multiplied in chaos, Buri's bloodline carried the order and wisdom that would one day shape the world. But in those early ages, the void trembled under Ymir's bulk. His offspring swarmed, filling the emptiness with their cold breath and hunger. The balance of Ginnungagap strained beneath their weight, and the first shadows of conflict stirred. For Ymir's kin, the Jotun, were born of rime and cruelty, while the gods-to-be were born of fire, will, and light. Between them lay the great war yet unspoken, a fate that even then was whispered through the roots of Yggdrasil, though the tree itself had yet to rise. The Viking skalds who later told these tales by firelight understood what it meant. They saw in Ymir the endless struggle between life and death, chaos and order, frost and flame. They compared his hunger to the hunger of a Viking man at sea, his sweat birthing kin as inexhaustible as the toil of a Viking woman raising her children by the fjord. To them, Ymir was both a warning and a memory. From his strength came the world, but from his chaos came the eternal enemy of the gods. Thus the first chapter of being was written in sparks and frost. Ymir, first of the giants, carried within his form the seed of war and the substance of creation. His death would one day give rise to earth, sea, and sky, yet in his birth was already the echo of doom. For from the melting ice and the searing flame came not peace, but struggle everlasting, the heartbeat of Viking mythology, where no triumph could be won without blood, and no life without strife. In the beginning, when silence still clung to Ginnungagap, and only Ymir's heavy breaths filled the void, another being stirred from the melting rime. She was no giant of rage and hunger, but a gentler force, born to give rather than devour. From the salty ice stepped Audhumla, the great cosmic cow, her flanks strong, her eyes calm as still waters, her udder flowing with 4 rivers of milk. Where Ymir was chaos, Audhumla was sustenance. Her milk poured like lifeblood into the emptiness, nourishing the first giant, who drank deeply, his belly swelling as if filled with the bounty of Viking food. Without her, even the mighty Ymir would have wasted away, and no tale of the gods could ever have been told. But Audhumla gave more than milk. She licked the salted ice with her broad tongue, patient and tireless, revealing something hidden within the frost. Day by day she worked, her strokes uncovering the form of a man, noble and bright. From the stone of ice, Buri emerged, the first of the gods, tall and fair of face, radiant with strength, unlike the lumbering brood of Ymir. From Buri would come Bor, and from Bor the sons who would shape all things, Odin, Vili, and Ve. They were not born of chaos, but of a lineage destined to bring order. While Ymir spawned giants from the sweat of his flesh and the darkness of his limbs, the line of Buri was born clean, carved not from filth, but from the ice licked open by the cow of plenty. Odin and his brothers would grow under the shadow of Ymir's brood, yet within them burned the fire of Muspelheim, tempered with the clarity of Niflheim's frost. From their hearts would rise will, wisdom, and strength gifts that no Viking man or Viking child could live without in the centuries that followed. The skalds who carried this story knew the meaning well. They saw in Audhumla the unyielding presence of nourishment, like the cow kept by a Viking woman to feed her kin through the harshest winter. They saw in Buri the first glimmer of order, the same order a Viking chieftain brought to his hall, binding men together under oath and law. And in Odin, not yet crowned Allfather, they saw the restless spirit of those who would seek wisdom at any cost, trading comfort for the power to shape destiny. Yet even in these early moments, the fate of gods and giants was already set upon the path of strife. Ymir's kin multiplied, vast and hungry, their footsteps shaking the void. Against them stood only the promise of Buri's line, slender in number but fierce in spirit. In the silence between fire and frost, the two races faced one another, one born of sweat and chaos, the other of ice and patience. The world itself had not yet been formed, and already it trembled with the weight of what was to come. Thus from the milk of a cow and the salt of ice came the first gods, Odin and his brothers, who would one day raise the sky and carve the earth from Ymir's corpse. But in that moment they were only the heirs of a promise, fed by the same force that had kept giants alive. Audhumla, the giver, had carried both kin and foe alike, yet it would be her gift to the gods that changed all fate. In her rivers of milk flowed the strength of survival, and in the figure she uncovered lay the spark of creation. From her care, the first gods rose, ready to meet the chaos of their age, and the saga of Viking mythology pressed forward, as unstoppable as the tide. From the milk of Audhumla came the first gods, and from their strength arose the courage to act where silence had long held sway. Odin, Vili, and Ve looked upon Ymir, the great giant sprawled across Ginnungagap, and saw not a forefather to revere, but a monster whose very being poured forth endless frost-blooded kin. Each drop of sweat from his skin birthed another giant, another rival, until the void itself trembled with their hunger. If the line of Buri was to survive, if order was ever to breathe in the chaos, Ymir had to fall. The three brothers rose against him, and their battle was not like that of Viking men with sword and axe, but a clash of cosmic will. Ymir's bulk filled the void, his footsteps shaking creation itself, his voice like thunder rolling through the gap. Against him strode Odin with the fire of Muspelheim in his gaze, Vili with unyielding resolve, and Ve with strength that surged like the sea. The struggle was fierce, the brothers striking with force, born not of flesh alone but of destiny. Giants screamed and shadows writhed, but at last the brothers overcame the Ancient One. With a final blow, Ymir fell, his death cry echoing through the gulf like the roar of 1,000 storms. Yet, from his death came the shaping of all things. The gods dragged his massive body into the emptiness, and where chaos once lay, they built the bones of the world. His blood, dark and endless, poured forth in torrents, drowning his brood in a flood so great that only 2 giants escaped, Bergelmir and his wife, who fled to raise new kin. From Ymir's blood was made the sea, its waves crashing and endless, like those a Viking child would one day hear beyond the fjords. His flesh became the fertile earth, his bones the mountains, his teeth the rocks and stones. His skull, lifted high, formed the dome of the sky, and from his hair grew the forests that would feed Viking men and shelter Viking women. The gods placed sparks from Muspelheim in the heavens, kindling them into stars, set as lanterns across the night. To the 4 corners they stationed dwarves, born of Ymir's flesh, but bound now to hold aloft the skull of their slain ancestor, so that the sky would not fall. Thus, what had once been void became Midgard, the world of men, and Asgard, the realm of the gods, linked together by the roots of fate that would one day be called Yggdrasil. This was the moment order entered the world. From death, life, from chaos, form, The gods' act was not mercy, but necessity, for without it all would have been swallowed by frost and shadow. And yet, the blood of Ymir did not vanish entirely. It lingered in the giants, who survived, in the cold breath of mountains, in the storms that broke against the land. The struggle had only begun, for in slaying the first being, Odin and his brothers had bound themselves to a fate of endless strife. The skalds, who told this tale by firelight, spoke of Ymir's slaying as the first triumph, but also the first doom. A Viking man would hear in it the lesson that no victory is without cost. A Viking woman would see in it the truth that life demands sacrifice. And a Viking child, staring into the flames, would dream of a world carved from blood and bone, where every stone and star carried the weight of that ancient death. Thus the brothers carved order from chaos, shaping the seas, the sky, and the earth from the corpse of the first giant. The world itself was born of violence, and from that beginning all stories would follow. The slaying of Ymir was not the end, but the first breath of the cosmos, and the first echo of the doom that still waits at the world's edge. When the corpse of Ymir had been carved into earth and sea, and sparks of fire had been hung in the sky, there still remained the question of how all things should be bound together. A world made of flesh and bone alone would crumble. It needed a spine, a living pillar, to root the realms and give them breath. From the heart of creation there rose Yggdrasil, the world tree, a mighty ash whose crown stretched beyond sight, and whose roots reached deeper than any man or god could fathom. It was not planted by hand, nor raised by craft, but sprang from the mingling of fire and frost, the eternal witness to all that was, all that is, and all that would be. Its trunk towered higher than mountains, its branches spread wide as the sky, and its roots drank from the oldest wells. Around its vastness, the worlds took their places. At its crown glittered Asgard, home of the gods, halls of strength and wisdom where Odin would one day sit upon his throne and watch all below. At its middle lay Midgard, the world of men, encircled by the serpent's coil, where Viking man and Viking woman would toil against frost, hunger, and the sea. At its roots sprawled Jotunheim, the land of giants, their voices like thunder in the deep. Beyond these lay the other realms light and shadow, fire and mist, each tethered by the tree's unyielding strength. 3 roots gave Yggdrasil its life, each drinking from a different spring. One reached into Asgard, nourished by the well of Erd, where the Norns, keepers of fate, wove the threads of all men and gods alike. Another reached into Jotunheim, where Mimir's well lay hidden, heavy with wisdom, guarded jealously by a head that whispered secrets of the deep. The third sank into Niflheim, to Hvergelmir, the well of roaring waters, where the dragon Nidhogg gnawed ceaselessly at the root, and serpents writhed in uncounted number. Even as Yggdrasil gave life, it was under siege, a reminder that all things born must endure struggle. Birds nested in its branches, carrying omens and songs between worlds. At the very top perched the eagle, whose eyes could see the breadth of all realms, and at its side the hawk Vedfolnir spread its wings. Far below, the squirrel Ratatoska scurried, racing up and down the trunk to carry words of malice between eagle and dragon, feeding strife as surely as any Viking skald carried tales from hall to hall. Deer grazed upon its leaves, their antlers heavy with frost, while serpents gnawed below. In its shade, every being found its place, from the highest god to the lowest worm. The skalds told how Yggdrasil was more than tree. It was the bridge of all that lived. To the Viking child, listening by the hearth, its branches were the sky above, its trunk the forests of home, its roots the hidden depths beneath the waves. To the Viking man rowing his ship, it was the mast of the world itself, binding sea and sky into one. To the Viking woman tending her kin, it was the promise that all threads of fate, however tangled, were woven upon the same loom. Yet even Yggdrasil was not eternal without trial. Nidhogg's fangs worked ever at its roots, frost and flame battered its bark, and the weight of 9 worlds bowed its limbs. But still it stood, tall and unyielding, defiant against time. It was said that when Ragnarök comes, Yggdrasil will shudder, its branches torn by storm, its roots by flame, yet even then it may endure, sheltering what life remains. Thus the world tree held the realms together, a living pillar of creation. From its crown to its roots, it bore the weight of gods and men, giants and spirits, fate and doom. Yggdrasil was the heart of Viking mythology, the endless bond between all things, a reminder that even in chaos, there is one trunk, one spine, one breath that holds the world. Upon the great ash, Yggdrasil hung 9 worlds, each bound by its roots and branches, each trembling to the same pulse of fate. They were not scattered like drifting leaves, but woven together, each realm a thread in the tapestry that gods, giants, and men alike could not escape. To speak of Viking mythology without these 9 realms is to speak of a hall without its roof, for within them all life, strife, and saga unfold. At the crown of the tree lay Asgard, the golden stronghold of the Aesir gods. Its halls were lofty, where Odin ruled with one eye turned to wisdom and the other to war. Thor thundered through its gates, Mjolnir in hand, ready to strike down any threat to his kin. Here feasts rang with the laughter of gods, and Valkyries rode forth to gather the chosen slain. It was the dream of every Viking man who died with axe in hand to be carried to Valhalla, where endless battle and endless feast awaited. Beneath it, yet nearer to the middle of the tree, stretched Midgard, the world of men. Encircled by the serpent Jormungandr, its lands were wild and hard, bordered by seas that tested courage, and winters that carved hunger into bone. Viking children were born here to hardship, Viking women to toil, Viking men to blood and frost. Yet Midgard endured, tethered by the gods, protected by their walls of might, fragile but fierce in spirit. To the east lay Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. Mountains clawed the sky, and storms rolled without end. It was a land of towering foes, ancient and cunning, where the Jotun plotted against Asgard, their voices booming like thunder. From here came strife, for the giants were kin to Ymir, and bore the memory of his fall like fire in their blood. Further still was Vanaheim, home of the Vanir gods. Unlike the warlike Aesir, the Vanir were tied to fertility, sea, and harvest. They were masters of foresight, givers of wealth and growth, and it was their clash with Asgard that ended in uneasy truce. A Viking farmer, praying over his seed, would whisper to Freya, just as a Viking woman yearning for children might call upon Freya. To the south roared Muspelheim, the realm of fire, where Surtur, the flame giant, stood, sword blazing bright enough to burn heaven itself. It was from here that the sparks first leapt into Ginnungagap to give the stars their glow. Yet it was also from here that doom would one day rise, for when Ragnarök came, Surtur would march, his flames devouring gods and men alike. To the north stretched Niflheim, a land of mist and ice, where Hvergelmir, the great well, roared with countless rivers. Frost and shadow cloaked this place, a realm untouched by warmth, its breath colder than death, and in its depths the dragon Nidhogg gnawed at the roots of the world, his hunger endless. Beside it lay Helheim, realm of the dead not chosen by battle. Here, under the rule of Hel, daughter of Loki, dwelt those who perished of sickness, age, or misfortune. It was a cold hall, not of torment, but of shadow, where souls lingered without glory. A Viking man who died by straw death would journey here, his saga untold in Valhalla's halls. Then came Alfheim, the world of the light elves, radiant and fair, spirits of beauty and mystery. They brought both blessing and mischief, slipping between shadows of dawn and dusk, seen in the shimmer upon water or the glow of a star. And in contrast, deep below, was Svartalfheim, or Nidavellir, the realm of dwarves. Here, beneath mountains, fires blazed in forges where hammers rang, crafting treasures that armed gods and doomed them alike. 9 worlds, bound by Yggdrasil's roots and branches, held together by fate. Each realm was not alone but part of the whole, and to tear one was to wound them all. For in Viking mythology, the 9 realms were more than places, they were the heartbeat of existence, the stage upon which gods, giants, and men played their brief, fiery roles before the twilight came. When the gods had carved the world from Ymir's corpse, and set the 9 realms upon the branches of Yggdrasil, the land still lay silent, rich with sea and stone, but empty of men. The waves rolled against the shore, forests whispered with wind, yet no voice of kin or child rose to greet the dawn. It was then that Odin, Vili, and Ve walked along the seashore, their eyes turned not to the heavens, but to the driftwood scattered at their feet. From the foam and tide lay 2 trunks of ashen elm, pale and lifeless, shaped by wave and wind, but empty of spirit. The brothers paused, for they saw more than wood, they saw the husk of a new kind of being, waiting only for the spark. Odin knelt first, pressing his breath upon the wood. Into the ash he gave spirit, the divine gift of life, so that it stirred and shuddered. Vili followed, granting will and thought, so that the forms began to rise, their eyes opening to the light of the new Sunday. Ve completed the gift, shaping flesh and blood, giving voice, hearing, and form. From the ash came the man, Ask. From the elm came the woman, Embla. Thus, upon the shore, mankind awoke for the first time, fragile yet fierce, bound not by the strength of giants, but by spirit, will, and form. Ask and Embla looked upon the world with wonder. They saw the sea that guarded them, the forests that whispered, the sky arched high above, and they knew it as their home. Though no weapons were in their hands, no halls to shield them, still they were not empty. For Odin's gift gave them breath, Vili's gift gave them thought, and Ve's gift gave them form, and in these lay a strength no storm could wash away. The skalds told how the gods chose ash and elm with care. Ash was strong, tall, unbending, like the mast of a ship carved by Viking men to face the fury of the waves. Elm was supple, graceful, and enduring, like the strength of a Viking woman who bore the weight of hearth and kin. Together, they became the parents of humankind, bound not by chaos like the giants, nor by flame like the gods, but by balance rooted in the world, yet lifted toward the sky. From Ask and Embla came all men and women who would walk Midgard, Viking children born centuries later, who laughed in the meadows and learned to fear the winter's cold, carried their breath. Viking men who bent their backs to plough the stubborn earth, or sailed into the unknown seas with hope and hunger, bore their spirit. Viking women who guarded the home, weaving, raising kin, and standing unbroken when war came, bore their will. Every hearth fire that burned, every hall raised against the night, was an echo of that first moment on the shore. Yet their birth also marked the beginning of mankind's burden, for unlike the gods, who feasted in Asgard, or the giants, who thrived in Jotunheim, Ask and Embla were mortal. Their lives would bend to the weight of hunger, the bite of cold, and the sting of death. Still, this was their strength. For though frail of flesh, they were fierce of spirit, and in their brief lives they carved meaning greater than the endless years of giants. Thus, upon the empty shore, from driftwood and breath, mankind came to be. The gods set them in Midgard, encircled by the serpent, a world both gift and trial. And from that day, every saga, every triumph, every sorrow of Viking man and woman traced its root back to Ask and Embla, the first of humankind, whose breath still lingers in the lungs of all who walk the earth. Long before men raised their halls in Midgard, war thundered in the heavens. It was not only giants who stood against the gods, but the gods themselves, for 2 tribes ruled the sky, the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir, with Odin at their head, were warriors, keepers of strength, order, and law, their might forged in struggle and battle. The Vanir were different, older in ways, tied to earth, sea, and fertility, masters of foresight and plenty. Where the Aesir gloried in war, the Vanir brought harvest and wealth, yet pride burned in both, and pride makes war as swiftly as hunger drives Viking men to sea. The spark came with Golvig, a seeress of the Vanir. She came into Asgard, bearing gifts of magic and foresight, yet the Aesir despised her witchcraft and her hunger for gold. 3 times they cast her into the fire, 3 times she burned, and 3 times she rose again, laughing amidst the flames. To the Vanir, this was an insult that could not be forgiven. To the Aesir, it was a warning that the Vanir's sorcery would corrupt their halls. Thus, words turned to blades, and the first war of the gods was loosed upon the worlds. The clash was fierce and long, raging not in one place but across the realms. Spears sang, and shields splintered, but the weapons of the Vanir were not only iron. They wielded Seither, deep magic that twisted fate and bent the will. Their foresight struck like a hidden dagger, while the Aesir answered with thunder, fire, and the fury of war bands. It was said the ground shook with every battle, and even the roots of Yggdrasil trembled at their strife. Skalds told of Viking men watching the skies and hearing echoes of that great war in the rumble of storms and the howl of the wind. Yet neither side could overcome the other. The Aesir had might, but the Vanir had cunning. The Vanir had foresight, but the Aesir had unbreakable resolve. Time wore on, and the gods themselves grew weary of endless blood. For what use is dominion if the world below crumbles into ruin? At last, both tribes sought peace, and to bind it they exchanged hostages. The Aesir gave to the Vanir Henir, wise in speech, and Mimir, keeper of knowledge. The Vanir gave to the Aesir Njord, god of sea and wealth, and his children Freyr and Freya, whose beauty and power shone brighter than gold. This exchange sealed the truce, yet not without bitterness. The Vanir, finding Henir empty of wisdom without Mimir at his side, grew wrathful. They slew Mimir and sent his head back to Odin. Yet Odin, grim and wise, preserved it with magic, and from then on Mimir's head whispered counsel from beyond death. Though uneasy, the peace endured, for both tribes knew their strength was greater together than apart. Thus the Aesir and Vanir became one, ruling side by side, their powers mingling as war and fertility, law and magic, storm and harvest. From that union the world grew richer, though the memory of fire and blood lingered in every hall. A Viking child, hearing this tale, would learn that even gods are torn by pride. A Viking man, scarred by war, would hear in it the truth that peace often tastes of ash, but is still worth the keeping. The War of the Gods was the first lesson of balance, that life is not only battle, nor only feast, but both. And though the Aesir and Vanir stood united thereafter, the memory of their clash lived on, an omen that even kinship forged in blood may one day splinter again. For in Viking mythology, peace is never without shadow, and every truce bears the weight of the war that birthed it. Odin was not born the All-Father. He became so through hunger, sacrifice, and the endless chase for wisdom. Where a Viking man might crave land, silver, or Viking food to fill his belly, Odin craved knowledge more than life itself. He knew strength alone could not hold the 9 worlds together. Giants had strength, and strength without wisdom turns to ruin. So Odin wandered, ever searching, willing to pay any price to see deeper into the web of fate. His first great sacrifice was at Mimir's well, the spring of wisdom that lay beneath one of Yggdrasil's roots. Its waters were heavy with secrets of the ages, guarded by Mimir, whose mind held the memory of all that had ever been. Odin came to the well and asked for a drink, but Mimir did not give freely. The price was steep, one of Odin's eyes. Without hesitation, Odin plucked it from his face and cast it into the dark waters. The well drank his sight, but in return gave him vision far beyond eyes, the wisdom to see what lies hidden, to weigh the turning of destiny, to grasp what even gods fear. From that day, Odin walked the worlds with but one eye, yet with a gaze that pierced deeper than any other. Still, wisdom was not a cup that could be drained once and for all. Odin knew there were other mysteries hidden in the heart of the world. The runes' ancient symbols of power, carved into the fabric of fate itself, lay beyond mortal reach. To claim them, Odin gave himself to death. He climbed Yggdrasil and hung himself upon its gallows, speared through by his own weapon, suspended between life and death for 9 nights. No bread passed his lips, no horn of mead touched his hand, for this was no feast of Viking food, but a fast of the spirit. Alone, racked by pain, his body swayed in the wind, a sacrifice not to gods but to himself. On the 9th night, the runes revealed themselves. They glowed beneath him, secrets of magic and fate rising from the deep. With a cry of triumph and agony, Odin seized them, and the knowledge filled him like fire fills a forge. He fell from the tree reborn, not merely a warrior or king, but the keeper of runes, the master of spells, the one who bent fate with word and wisdom. From that sacrifice, all magic known to men and gods was loosed into the world. Yet even this was not enough. Odin sought wisdom wherever it could be found. He questioned the dead in Hel, bent his ear to the whispers of the Norns, and sent his ravens, Hugin and Munin, across the realms to bring him thought and memory. He bore the weight of foresight, knowing that even the mightiest gods could not escape the doom of Ragnarök. For him, knowledge was both gift and torment. The more he learned, the clearer the shadows of fate became. The skalds told how a Viking child listening to this tale would understand that courage was not only in wielding steel, but in enduring pain for something greater. A Viking man would hear in it the truth that wisdom often demands sacrifice, whether in silver, sweat, or blood. A Viking woman would see that even gods must give of themselves to protect what they love. Thus Odin became the All-Father, not because he ruled the gods by strength, but because he carried their burdens with sacrifice. He gave his eye, he gave his body, he gave his peace of mind. All for wisdom, all for the fate of gods and men alike. In every rune carved, in every well of knowledge sought, in every raven's cry, there lingers the echo of his sacrifice, the endless hunger of Odin, the seeker of wisdom. When the storm rolled over the mountains and the sky cracked with fire, men said it was Thor riding his chariot, Mjolnir in hand, guarding both gods and mortals. If Odin was the seeker of wisdom, Thor was the shield of the living. His strength was not hidden in riddles or runes, but shown in every blow of his hammer, every stride that shook the ground. To Viking men who raised axe and shield, Thor was the protector they trusted. To a Viking child, trembling as thunder split the sky, it was Thor's voice they heard, not wrath, but guardianship. Thor was born of Odin and the earth goddess Jord, his body strong as stone, his spirit fierce as flame. Red-bearded, iron-fisted, his presence filled halls and fields alike. He was no subtle god, no whisperer of secrets, but the living storm, straight and unyielding. His weapon, Mjolnir, was the greatest gift of the dwarves, a hammer that could crush mountains and return to his hand no matter how far it flew. With it, Thor struck down frost giants, stormed their strongholds, and kept Midgard safe from the chaos that seethed beyond its walls. The tales of Thor's battles filled Viking halls, spoken by firelight as men drank and children listened wide-eyed. He was the slayer of Hrungnir, the giant with a heart of stone, whose skull Thor split with a single blow. He fought Jormungandr, the world's serpent, so vast it encircled the seas. Though their final battle waits at Ragnarök, Thor once hooked the serpent from the deep while fishing, his strength straining the very waves until the line snapped and fate deferred their doom. In each tale, Thor's courage was not only his own, but a promise that gods would not abandon men, nor leave Midgard prey to the dark. Yet Thor was not only war and slaughter. He was also the god of harvest and hallowing, the one who blessed marriages, consecrated oaths, and brought fertility to the fields. Viking women prayed to him for the safety of their kin, Viking farmers for the ripening of their crops, Viking sailors for the strength to endure the sea's fury. His hammer was raised not only to kill but to sanctify, marking the bond between man and God, between earth and sky. Still, his path was not without trial. For all his might, Thor was mocked by tricksters and tested by guile. Loki once lured him into Jotunheim, where giants deceived him with illusions. Thor drank from a horn he thought small, yet it was the sea itself, and his draught lowered its tide. He sought to lift a cat, yet it was Jormungandr in disguise, and the world trembled at his effort. Even the mightiest storm could not break every chain, and in these tales, Viking men learned that strength alone cannot bend all things. But Thor's heart was never broken by defeat, for he was not a god who shirked trial. His courage was as steady as the hammer in his hand, his loyalty as firm as the oaths sworn in mead halls. If Odin carried the weight of knowledge and saw the doom that lay ahead, Thor bore the weight of action, meeting fate not with dread, but with blows that split the sky. When thunder rolls, it is Thor who rides. When lightning falls, it is the spark of Mjolnir flashing across the heavens. And when men and women of Midgard lift their eyes to the storm, they do not fear, for they know Thor, hammer of thunder, protector of gods and men, still stands watch. Among the gods of Asgard, none was more loved and hated, trusted and betrayed than Loki. He was no warrior like Thor, no seeker like Odin, no giver like Freya. He was a trickster, a shapeshifter, a whisperer of cunning, whose words could turn joy into sorrow and sorrow into laughter within the same breath. To the Viking man who knew both the warmth of fire and the sting of betrayal, Loki's tale was familiar, for he was both friend and foe, gift-bringer and curse-bearer, loyal companion and hidden knife. Loki's blood was not wholly of the gods. He was born of giants, kin to those who warred against Asgard, yet he was welcomed into Odin's hall, bound by oaths of brotherhood. He sat at the feasts of the gods, drank from their horns, and shared in their deeds. Often, his cunning saved them. It was Loki who tricked the dwarves into forging treasures for the Aesir, Odin's spear Gungnir, Freya's ship Skidbladnir, and Thor's hammer Mjolnir, the very weapon that would shield men and gods alike. Without his guile, the halls of Asgard would have stood far weaker, and every Viking child who later listened to tales of Thor's hammer owed its presence to Loki's slyness. Yet as quickly as he gave, he took away. Loki's tongue was sharp, his temper restless, and his thirst for mischief unquenchable. He mocked the gods in their own halls, speaking truths so bitter that no one could bear them, yet laughing as if words were but wind. He was the serpent who slid between bonds, the fox whose tracks led friend and foe alike into peril. Where a Viking woman wove threads of kinship, Loki wove knots of discord, tightening them until they strangled peace. His children bore the mark of his doom. By the giantess Angrboda, he fathered 3 monsters: Fenrir the wolf, whose jaws would one day swallow Odin himself; Jormungandr, the world serpent, who would coil the seas and face Thor at Ragnarök; and Hel, half maiden, half corpse, who ruled the realm of the dead not claimed by battle. From Loki's seed came not hope but terror, a brood that even the gods feared. And though they bound Fenrir, cast Jormungandr into the sea, and sent Hel to the shadowed halls below, still the mark of Loki lay in them all, a shadow that no chain could hold. Yet Loki was not evil in the simple way men might curse an enemy. He was chaos given voice, the shifting tide that brings both wreck and renewal. He carried Thor across realms, devised schemes to recover treasures, and outwitted giants who sought the ruin of gods. His cunning was a tool, sharp as a blade, and like a blade it could protect or destroy depending on whose hand it served. A Viking man who heard this tale knew the lesson well. A friend too clever can be as dangerous as the fiercest foe. Still, Loki's path bent ever toward betrayal. His laughter, once tolerated, grew darker. His tricks, once amusing, cut deeper. The gods, who once clasped his hand in fellowship, began to watch him with wary eyes, knowing that though he sat at their tables, his heart was restless. The doom of Asgard was not written only in the jaws of wolves or the fire of Surtur, but in the shifting soul of the trickster within their own hall. Thus Loki, friend and foe, walked the line between salvation and destruction. Without him, the gods would lack their treasures, their victories, their very tales. Yet because of him, they carried the seed of their ruin. He was laughter and sorrow bound in one, as changeable as the sea. And when the storm of Ragnarök breaks, it will be Loki's hand that strikes both against the gods he once saved and with the monsters he brought into the world. In the halls of the gods, strength was not measured only by hammers and spears. Behind the roar of battle and the clash of shields stood the goddesses, whose power was woven not in brute force, but in fate, love, and unseen will. To the Viking man, they were as vital as Odin and Thor, for no warrior could face the storm without knowing the hand of destiny that guided him. To the Viking woman, they were a mirror of endurance and mastery, shaping both hearth and heaven. And to the Viking child, listening by firelight, their names burned bright with wonder. Frigg, Freya, and the Norns, keepers of threads no sword could sever. Frigg, wife of Odin, sat upon the high seat, her gaze stretching across the worlds. Where Odin sought wisdom in pain and sacrifice, Frigg's knowing came from foresight that needed no well. She was the silent seer, who spoke little but knew much. In her hands lay the bonds of kin and the sanctity of home. It was Frigg who wept for her son Balder before his death, for she foresaw what even Odin's wandering eye could not prevent. She was not only queen but mother, and her power lay in that quiet strength which outlasts the roar of battle. A Viking woman tending her children could see herself in Frigg's unyielding care, holding her family against the bite of winter and the shadow of fate. Freya, daughter of the Vanir, was different, radiant as flame and fierce as storm. She was beauty and battle alike, mistress of Sather, the deep magic of fate which even Odin himself learned from her. Half the slain of war did not go to Odin's hall, but to Freya's field, Folkvanga, where she chose her champions with eyes as sharp as any blade. She rode her chariot drawn by cats, wore the necklace Brisingamen that shone like fire, and wept tears of gold. Desire, love, wealth, and war all bent to her will. To the Viking man, she was the promise of victory and longing. To the Viking woman, she was proof that beauty could wield power as fierce as iron. But above all stood the Norns, the three who dwelt at the base of Yggdrasil, by the well of Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, past, present, and what is to come. They carved the fate of gods and men alike, etching runes into the trunk of the world tree, their hands weaving what none could unmake. Even Odin, with all his sacrifices, could not sway them. Thor's hammer could not shatter their threads. Loki's cunning could not twist their loom. They were older than Asgard, older than giants, older than any saga sung by skalds in smoky halls. Every Viking child born carried their mark. Every Viking man died when they decreed. Every Viking woman's fate was bound in their weaving. Thus the goddesses of fate and power shaped the world in ways no weapon could. Frigg's foresight kept the hearth strong, Freya's might carried warriors into glory, and the Norn's threads bound all life to its destined end. To the Skalds, their tales were as vital as thunder or spear, for they reminded men that power wears many faces: a mother's tears, a lover's fire, a weaver's hand, scratching runes into bark. In Viking mythology, no god, giant, or man could escape these unseen forces, for while strength might win a battle, and cunning might win a treasure, destiny ruled all. And behind that destiny stood the goddesses, silent, radiant, and eternal, shaping the fates of gods and mortals alike, with a power as vast as the world tree itself. Beneath the branches of Yggdrasil, beyond the sight of men, and often beyond the grasp of gods, lived the hidden folk elves and dwarves, beings of shadow and shimmer, whose touch shaped the fate of all realms. They were not mighty like Odin, nor thundering like Thor, yet without them the world would be bare of its greatest wonders. The skalds who spoke of them by firelight knew well that beauty and terror often walk hand in hand, and in the craft of the hidden folk both could be found. The elves were beings of light and mystery, dwelling in Alfheim, their realm radiant as dawn. They were tall and fair, shining as if woven from sunlight, yet as distant as the stars. Some brought blessing, slipping unseen into fields to grant growth, making the earth swell with harvest, bringing luck to Viking men who bent their backs over ploughs. Others whispered in dreams, guiding or deceiving with riddles only half true. To Viking women who prayed for the health of children, the elves could bring fortune or mischief, for their touch was never wholly tame. They were glimpsed only in the shimmer of dew or the gleam of a star, and their power was as elusive as breath in winter air. If the elves were light, the dwarves were darkness, dwelling deep in the bones of the earth, in Nidavellir or Svartalfheim. From caverns lit by molten fires and smoke, they forged wonders unmatched by gods or men. With hammer and tongs, they crafted treasures that shaped destiny itself. Odin's spear Gungnir, unerring in flight, Freya's ship Skidbladnir, which could fold into a pouch and yet carry armies, and Thor's hammer Mjolnir, short in handle but mighty enough to crush giants and hallow men. These were no mere trinkets, but weapons and tools that bound the fate of the 9 realms. A Viking child, hearing these tales, would learn that even in the dark, greatness could be forged by unseen hands. Yet the dwarves were not only craftsmen, but keepers of greed. They coveted gold, crafting it into rings and chains, heavy with curse and power. The Brisingamen, Freya's necklace of fire, was their work, shining with beauty but bought with trickery and longing. The cursed ring Anvaranort, which brought ruin to all who held it, too, came from their forges. Their skill was matched only by their hunger, and though they shaped the tools of gods, their hearts were bound to the weight of treasure buried beneath stone. The hidden folk were not always kind to men. They could slip into houses unseen, steal Viking food from the hearth, twist fate with charms, or vanish children into shadow. Yet they could also bring blessing, a sudden catch of fish, a harvest rich beyond hope, a weapon of steel that did not break in battle. The Viking man who set out into the wilds knew he was never alone, for light or shadow might follow at his back, depending on which of the hidden folk took notice of him. The skalds spoke of them with reverence and caution. They were not to be worshipped as gods, but not to be scorned as beasts. They dwelt between, shaping the world from behind its veil, reminding men that not all power sits upon a throne or carries a spear. Some power glimmers in light too bright to hold, some hides in darkness too deep to pierce, and some slips into the world unseen, touching men and gods alike without ever showing its face. Thus the elves, the dwarves, and the hidden folk kept their place in Viking mythology, not as rulers, but as makers and movers of fate. Their treasures armed the gods, their secrets whispered through the ages, and their presence haunted the shadows of earth and sky. Without them, the sagas would be hollow, for the unseen hand is often the one that shapes destiny most. In the sagas of the north, it was not only gods and men who filled the worlds, but beasts of such size and terror that even the bravest Viking man trembled at their names. These creatures were not mere animals, but forces of chaos and fate, born from the dark mingling of Loki's bloodline and the raw wildness of creation itself. They prowled the 9 realms, vast and unstoppable, reminders that the order carved from Ymir's corpse was never secure, and that the roots of Yggdrasil shook with every stir of their bodies. Foremost among them was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. Cast by the gods into the sea that girdled the world, he grew until his body encircled all of Midgard, tail locked between his own fangs. His coils stirred the oceans, raising storms that crushed ships and drowned Viking sailors who braved the deep. When lightning split the sky and thunder roared, men said it was Thor calling the serpent's name, for it was known that their fates were bound together. Once, Thor cast a line baited with the head of an ox and drew Jormungandr from the waves, the serpent's eyes blazing, venom dripping, its jaws wide enough to devour mountains. Though the gods feared the battle then, fate held it for Ragnarök, when Thor and the serpent would kill one another and the seas would boil with their rage. But if Jormungandr haunted the waters, Fenrir stalked the land. Born of Loki, the great wolf grew with such monstrous strength that even the gods trembled. No chain could hold him. Each time he was bound, he broke free. His jaws gaped so wide they could swallow heaven and earth in one bite. At last, the gods forged a fetter unlike any other, spun from impossibilities, the sound of a cat's footsteps, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the beard of a woman, the spittle of a bird. With this silken ribbon, Gleipnir, they lured Fenrir into binding. Yet even then the wolf sensed deceit, and demanded a pledge of good faith. Only Tyr, god of courage, dared place his hand in Fenrir's mouth. When the beast found himself trapped, he bit down, severing Tyr's hand in fury. Bound though he was, the wolf's rage shook the earth, and it was foretold that at Ragnarök he would break his chains, devour Odin himself, and be slain only by Vidar, the silent avenger. Others too haunted the realms. Nidhogg, the dragon of Niflheim, gnawed ceaselessly at the roots of Yggdrasil, his fangs dripping venom into the wells of life. Above, the eagle perched high in the tree, trading insults with the dragon through the mischief of the squirrel Ratatoska, whose endless chatter carried strife from root to crown. 4 great stags roamed Yggdrasil's branches, devouring its leaves, while beneath, serpents writhed without number. These were not creatures of chance, but symbols of the endless tension that held the worlds together, the gnawing, the biting, the slow decay that even the strongest Viking hall could not resist forever. To the Viking child, listening wide-eyed as the skald spoke, these beasts were both terror and wonder. To the Viking woman, they were omens, reminders that even the gods could not master fate. To the Viking man, they were trials waiting beyond the horizon, battles to be sung of though few would survive them. Thus the beasts of the worlds lurked at the edge of every saga, vast shadows looming over gods and mortals alike. Jormungandr coiled in the sea, Fenrir strained at his bonds, Nidhogg gnawed at the roots of life. Their presence was the echo of chaos that could never be fully slain, the promise that doom was not far but ever near. And in the heart of Viking mythology, they were not monsters alone, but harbingers of the end, waiting in silence for the day their fangs and coils would break the world. When a Viking man took up his axe and sailed into battle, he did so with more than victory in mind. Death itself was not feared, for beyond the last breath lay halls of glory or shadows of silence. The afterlife in Viking mythology was not a single fate, but many, each shaped by the manner of one's death and the will of the gods. To live was struggle, to die was passage, and the greatest prize awaited those who met the end with weapon in hand. Foremost of all realms of the dead was Valhalla, the hall of the slain. There, in the shining stronghold of Odin, chosen warriors feasted and fought without end. Valkyries, bright maidens clad in armour, rode upon the storm, searching the battlefield for the bravest of the fallen. With spears raised, they lifted the dead from bloodied ground, carrying them on swift steeds across the sky. A Viking child, watching storm clouds gather, might imagine their wings in the rolling thunder, their steeds flashing in the lightning. To be chosen by the Valkyries was the highest honor, a promise that death was not defeat but triumph. In Valhalla, the dead lived as warriors eternal. Each morning they armed themselves and fought upon the fields, their swords clashing, shields shattering, bodies falling. Yet when evening came, wounds closed, flesh mended, and the fallen rose to feast once more. The tables were laden with endless meat carved from the boar Sahrimnir, whose body was renewed each day, and Viking food flowed with mead from the goat Hadron, whose udders poured sweet drink without end. Odin himself presided, watching from his high seat, for these were his champions, gathered for the final battle at Ragnarök, when their strength would stand beside the gods. But not all the dead went to Valhalla. Half of those slain were taken to Folkvanga, the field of Freya, goddess of love and war. There too they dwelt in honour, though under her rule rather than Odin's. Beyond these, countless others fell not by sword, but by sickness, hunger, or age, what the skalds called a straw death. These souls did not rise to halls of mead and glory, but sank into Helheim, the cold realm ruled by Hel, daughter of Loki. Hel's domain was not fire nor torment, but shadow and silence. It was a place of pale halls and slow sorrow, where the dead lingered without joy. The goddess herself was half beautiful, half rotten, one side fair as a maiden, the other blackened with decay. To enter her realm was to pass into a fate without honour, where the names of men faded and no skald sang their deeds. A Viking woman who died in childbirth, a Viking man felled by pestilence, a Viking child who succumbed to the winter's cold, these souls drifted to Helheim, forgotten by glory, but not by the weave of fate. Beyond these realms lay others still. Sailors lost at sea might find themselves in the halls of Ran, the sea goddess who cast her nets wide to snare the drowned. Some spoke of mound dwellers, spirits lingering in burial places, haunting the living with whispers and shadow. The afterlife was not one road but many, each path twisting according to the life and death that preceded it. To the Viking people, death was not an end, but a continuation, shaped by honour, courage, and fate. A Viking man sought the clash of steel not only for silver or land, but for the chance to join Odin's hall. A Viking woman endured hardship with strength, knowing her deeds bound her family's name long after she was gone. A Viking child, hearing these tales, would grow to face life unafraid of death, for beyond the grave waited halls of feasting, or the quiet pull of shadows. Thus Valhalla and the afterlife were the mirror of life itself, battle and feast, shadow and silence, honour and sorrow. To die was to step into the arms of destiny, whether borne by Valkyries into the golden hall, or led by Hel into her dark domain. And in this lay the heart of Viking belief that every death, whether glorious or humble, was a thread in the endless tapestry of fate. In the golden halls of Asgard, even as the gods feasted and thundered in triumph, a shadow prowled among them, Fenrir, the monstrous wolf. Born of Loki's blood and the giantess Angroda, he grew faster than the gods could reckon, swelling in size and strength, until his paws shook the earth and his jaws gaped wide enough to swallow the sky. At first, Odin allowed him to remain, for the wolf was but a cub, and the Aesir believed they could tame what they feared. But each day Fenrir grew, and each day the gods looked upon him with dread, knowing that no Viking man, no Viking spear, no Viking food even, could distract a beast that carried the doom of worlds in his breath. The gods whispered of prophecies, of how this wolf would one day break free and devour Odin himself. Yet they also feared to strike him down, for fate is not so easily slain, and blood spilt too soon often hastens its fulfillment. So they resolved not to kill Fenrir, but to bind him. They forged the strongest chains they could craft, heavy as mountains, hard as iron. First came lading, vast and thick, which they cast about the wolf's limbs. But Fenrir shook himself, and the chain burst like straw beneath a Viking plough. Then came Dromi, twice as strong, twice as heavy. Again the wolf let them bind him, and again he tore it apart, shattering it like twigs beneath his stride. At last, the gods sought help from the dwarves of Svartalfheim, whose craft surpassed all others. The dwarves spun a ribbon called Gleipnir, soft and smooth as silk, yet stronger than the roots of Yggdrasil. It was made not of any common thing, but of impossibilities. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. From these the dwarves wove a thread no eye could see through, yet no force could break. With it in hand, the gods returned to Fenrir. But the wolf was not witless. He eyed the slender ribbon and saw trickery in its softness. No chain had held him before, and this thing looked weaker than binding thread. Suspicion flared in his eyes, and he growled that he would not be bound unless one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. None dared, save Tyr, the boldest of the Aesir, god of law and courage. Without hesitation, Tyr laid his hand between Fenrir's fangs. So they bound the wolf with Gleipnir, and though he strained with all his might, the ribbon held. His muscles surged like waves, his claws tore the earth, his howl shook the heavens, but still the fetter did not break. Realizing the betrayal, Fenrir bit down, severing Tyr's hand in a spray of blood. From that day, Tyr bore the mark of courage, a god who had given his hand for the safety of all. Fenrir remained bound, chained to a great rock, with a sword set between his jaws to hold them open. Saliva ran from his mouth in rivers, forming the vile stream called Van. Yet though bound, his eyes still burned with fury, and his breath reeked of doom. For it was foretold that when Ragnarök came, Fenrir would break free, his paws shattering the earth, his jaws swallowing Odin, the Allfather himself. The skalds told this tale as warning, that even gods, for all their wisdom and might, cannot undo fate, only delay it. To the Viking child, it was a lesson in courage. To the Viking man, a reminder that strength alone is not enough. And to the Viking woman, proof that sacrifice carries as much weight as steel. The binding of Fenrir was no triumph, but a pause before the storm, a ribbon spun from impossibilities, holding the jaws of doom only until the world's end. In the deep halls beneath mountains, where fire glowed on anvils and hammers rang like thunder, the dwarves wrought treasures that shaped the fate of gods and men. They were not made of mere gold or iron, but of craft so fine and power so great that even Odin, Thor, and Freya bent their pride to claim them. These were the gifts forged in fire, artifacts that bore the weight of destiny itself. And like all wonders, they came not without trickery, for at the heart of their making stood Loki, the sly one, whose schemes brought both ruin and greatness. It began when Loki, ever the mischief maker, cut the golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife. Her locks, fair as fields of ripe grain, tumbled away beneath his blade, and Thor's wrath rose like a storm. To escape his doom, Loki swore to replace her hair with something finer. He fled to Svartalfheim, realm of dwarves, and begged the sons of Ivaldi to craft new tresses. With hammer and forge, they shaped strands of gold, living and supple, that would root and grow upon Sif's head. Alongside this wonder, they made two more, Skidbladnir, a ship for Freya, vast enough to carry all the gods, yet foldable into a pouch, and Gungnir, Odin's spear, straight as truth, unerring in flight, whose strike no armour could turn aside. But Loki, never content, taunted other dwarves, Brokkr and Sindri, boasting they could not match such treasures. They took his wager, and at their forge began their work. Into the fire they placed a pigskin, and out came Gullimbursti, the golden boar, whose mane shone like dawn, and whose hooves ran swifter than any steed. Next they placed gold upon the anvil, and from it drew Draupnir, Odin's ring, from which every 9th night sprang 8 new rings, a fountain of endless wealth. Last they shaped iron, sweating and straining, while Loki, desperate to ruin them, stung Brokkr's eyelid with a fly's bite. Still the dwarf endured, and from the forge leapt Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. Its handle was shorter than intended, yet its power was unmatched. It could crush mountains, summon storms, and return unfailingly to Thor's hand. The gods gathered to judge these gifts, and though all were marvels, none could deny that Mjolnir was greatest, for it alone promised the defense of Asgard against the giants. Thor grasped it, and the thunder in his veins found its weapon, a bond that would carry him through battles until the world's end. The dwarves claimed their victory, and Loki, bound by his wager, lost his lips. Yet his tongue could not be silenced, and his trickery carried on. These treasures became more than tools. They were symbols of divine power. Odin's Gungnir was the spear of authority, cast in oath and war, binding men and gods alike. Draupnir was not only wealth, but a sign of plenty and sacrifice, laid upon Baldur's pyre to mark love and grief. Mjolnir became the hammer not only of destruction, but of blessing, raised at weddings, over births, and over Viking food and drink to hallow them. To Viking men who lifted axes in battle, it was Thor's hammer they called upon. To Viking women who guarded hearth and kin, it was Mjolnir's sign that brought safety and sanctity to their homes. The skalds who sang of these gifts knew well their meaning. They were born of fire and forge, of rivalry and cunning, of toil and trickery alike. They bound gods to their fates, as tightly as Yggdrasil's roots bound the worlds. To the Viking child listening wide-eyed, these treasures were proof that greatness comes not without trial, and that from the flames of strife can rise wonders eternal. Thus the treasures forged in fire endured through every saga, shining as bright as the sparks that birthed them, Mjolnir, Draupnir, Gungnir, and the rest, each carrying within it the echo of dwarves' hammers and the unending fate of gods. Baldur the Beautiful was the brightest of the gods, fair of face, gentle of heart, and radiant as the sun at dawn. Wherever he walked, joy followed, for no hatred could cling to him, no darkness endure his presence. Skalds told how even the flowers bent toward his step, and Viking children, hearing his name, thought of warmth after long winter. To Viking men hardened by battle, he was a reminder of peace. To Viking women who bore the weight of toil, he was hope made flesh. In him lay the promise that not all was war and strife, that light itself had taken form among the Aesir. But beauty draws envy, and joy invites sorrow. Baldur was plagued by dreams of his own death, shadows that crept into his sleep though waking life was full of light. Odin, fearing what lay hidden in fate, rode to the realm of hell to seek the truth. There he learned the bitter prophecy. Baldur would die, and with his passing, the first stone of doom would fall, heralding the twilight of gods. Desperate to defy fate, Frigg, Baldur's mother, went to every corner of the worlds, taking oaths from all things not to harm her son. Fire and water swore, stone and steel swore, beast and bird, sickness and poison, each pledged never to wound him. Only one small thing was overlooked, the mistletoe, thought too weak, too harmless to matter. With these oaths in place, the gods made sport of Baldur's invulnerability. They hurled spears, cast stones, swung axes, and each weapon turned aside, leaving him unscathed. Laughter rang through Asgard, and Baldur shone among them as the untouchable. But Loki, ever watchful, saw the one flaw in the weave. He fashioned a dart of mistletoe, slender and sharp, and placed it in the hand of Hodra, Baldur's blind brother. Guiding his aim, Loki whispered, and Hodra cast the dart. It struck true, piercing Baldur's heart. Light fell into shadow, and the joy of the gods was shattered in an instant. The halls of Asgard were struck silent, their laughter turned to wails. Odin bowed his head, knowing fate had spoken. Frigg wept as no mother had ever wept, her tears falling like rivers upon the earth. Even Thor, breaker of giants, could not lift his hammer against grief. The gods placed Baldur upon a ship, his body laid with treasures, weapons, and gifts of Viking food and mead, as if to honour both king and kin. Yet the ship was so vast it could not be moved. until a giantess, Hyrrokin, came riding a wolf with serpents for reins and pushed it to sea. As flames consumed the pyre, Odin placed Draupnir, his golden ring, upon his son's breast, a gift of wealth and sorrow to follow him into death. Nanna, Baldur's faithful wife, overcome by grief, cast herself upon the fire, joining him in the realm beyond. Their ashes rose with the smoke, carried into the night, while all the worlds felt the weight of the loss. Even stones were said to crack, and beasts to howl in mourning. Yet there was still hope. Hermod, son of Odin, rode to Hel's realm, begging the goddess to release Baldur. Hel agreed, but only if all things in the world would weep for him. And so they did. Men and women, gods and giants, trees and stones, even the ground itself shed tears. But one figure, Loki in disguise as the giantess Thirk, refused. Because of that single denial, Baldur remained in Hel's cold halls, his return denied, and sorrow sealed. From that day, the Aesir carried grief in their hearts. For Baldur the Beautiful was more than a son or brother, he was their light. His death was the wound that never healed, the reminder that even gods were bound to fate. To the Viking man, it was proof that no strength can guard against destiny. To the Viking child, it was the first whisper of Ragnarök, when all light would fade. And to the sagas, it was the sorrow that shook the gods, a tragedy carved forever into the heart of Viking mythology. After Baldur the Beautiful fell, the laughter of Loki could no longer be tolerated in the halls of the gods. Once he had been their companion, riding beside Thor, feasting beside Odin, whispering schemes that brought both treasures and ruin. But now the mask of friendship was torn away, and all saw him for what he was, the serpent at their hearth, the betrayer whose trick had struck the brightest light from the heavens. His name, once spoken with wary amusement, became a curse. No Viking man would forgive such treachery. No Viking woman would forget the tears of Frigg. At first, Loki fled. Knowing the wrath of Asgard would not sleep, he disguised himself in forms of beast and bird, darting across sea and sky. He built a house with 4 doors, open to every wind, so that no trap could corner him. By day he became a salmon, swimming in the rivers, slipping between rocks, his scales flashing like fire. By night he crouched by his hearth, weaving nets to ensnare others, never knowing the gods watched and waited. When Odin's eye fell upon him, the hunt began. The gods came with nets of their own, casting them into the waters where Loki swam. He leapt high, a silver arc over the waves, but Thor's hand was ready. The thunder god seized him, his grip unbreakable, and dragged him thrashing from the river. Thus was Loki taken, not by trickery or guile, but by force, like a wolf pulled from a fold by a Viking hunter. Bound and dragged before the Aesir, he spat curses, yet none listened. His doom was already spoken. The gods seized his sons, Vali and Nafi, and turned Vali into a wolf. Maddened, the beast tore his brother to pieces, and with Nafi's entrails they bound Loki fast. They carried him to a cave deep in the earth, where no light reached, and there they laid his punishment. 3 stones they set, and on each they fastened him shoulders, loins, and knees bound, so that he could not stir. Over him they hung a serpent, its fangs dripping venom that fell drop by drop upon his face. His wife, Sigyn, faithful, though cursed by fate, knelt beside him with a bowl, catching the poison as it dripped. But when the bowl grew heavy, she turned to empty it, and in that moment venom struck Loki's skin. His body convulsed, his screams shook the cavern, and the earth itself trembled with his writhing. Men would feel these shudders as earthquakes, the groaning of stone and soil beneath their feet, and skalds told Viking children it was Loki's agony that shook the ground. So he lay, bound in pain, chained not by iron but by the entrails of his own son, his laughter silenced, his cunning trapped. There he would remain until the end of days, when Ragnarök would loosen every fetter and unleash him once more. Until then, he suffered, and the gods above bore the weight of his betrayal in silence. For the tale of Loki's banishment was not only the tale of punishment, but of warning. To the Viking man, it was the lesson that betrayal among kin leads only to ruin. To the Viking woman, it was a reminder that even love, like Sigyn's, is tested by sorrow deeper than stone. And to the Viking child, it was a story of fate, that no trick, no disguise, no flight could ever escape what the Norns had written. Thus Loki, once a friend, once a foe, once both at once, was cast into darkness, chained beneath the dripping serpent. His laughter, which once brought both marvel and misery, turned to screams that echoed through the bones of the world. And still, in the silence between storms, men wondered which was more dreadful, the day Loki was bound, or the day he would break free. From the moment Ymir's blood flooded the void, the gods knew that doom lay at the end of all things. No feast in Asgard, no clash of steel in Midgard could drown the whispers of fate. The Norns carved runes into Yggdrasil's bark, and their words were heavy. A day would come when even the might of Odin and the thunder of Thor could not hold back the tide. The Skalds named it Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, and Viking men, hearing the tale, sat silent, for in it even courage faltered. The omens were many, each dark as storm clouds gathering before a battle. First would come Fimbulwinter, a cold so fierce it would gnaw the marrow from every bone. 3 winters would follow without a summer between, snow falling thick as spears, frost burying fields, rivers locked in ice. Viking children would starve, Viking women would weep for bread, and Viking men would fall upon one another, raiding their own kin for scraps of Viking food. Kinship would break, oaths would wither, and blood would run freely across the earth. Then would come the howling of wolves. Skirl and Hati, the sky chasers, would at last succeed in their endless hunt. One would devour the sun, and the other the moon, plunging the world into shadow. Stars would vanish from the heavens, their light swallowed, leaving only darkness. In the seas, Jormungandr would stir, his coils lashing waves against the land, venom spilling into waters that once fed men. On the shore, Fenrir would strain at his bonds, and with a sound like mountains breaking, the fetter Gleipnir would snap. His jaws would gape to heaven and earth alike, ready to devour all between. The dead too would rise. From hell's cold realm, legions would march beneath her half-living gaze, and Naglfar, the ship made from the nails of the dead, would sail with giants upon its deck. Loki, loosed from his chains, would stand at their helm, his laughter carrying across the storm, his eyes set on vengeance. From Muspelheim would march Surtur, the fire giant, sword blazing bright enough to split the sky, his flames devouring forests, fields, and halls. Even Yggdrasil would groan, its roots shaken by Nidhogg's gnawing, its branches shuddering beneath the weight of chaos. The horn of Heimdall would sound, echoing across the 9 realms, calling gods and men to the last battle. On Vigrid's plain they would meet Aesir, Vanir, giants, beasts, and the dead, clashing in the storm of the end. Odin would ride at the front, his one eye blazing, his spear Gungnir raised. Thor would stride beside him, Mjolnir in hand, the storm itself in his heart. But prophecy did not promise victory. Odin was fated to fall to Fenrir's jaws, Thor to the venom of Jormungandr, Freya to the fire of Surtur. The gods knew it, and still they prepared, for in Viking belief there was no greater honour than to meet death unyielding. A Viking man who died on the field knew the same truth, that glory was not in living forever, but in standing firm when fate closed its fist. The Skalds told this tale not only to chill the heart, but to steel it. A Viking woman, hearing of Ragnarök, might hold her child tighter, knowing the world itself could perish, but courage must endure. A Viking child, hearing the prophecy, would learn that even gods cannot escape fate, yet they face it with head high, sword drawn, and will unbroken. So the omens of doom were not secrets, but warnings. Ragnarök was not a question of if, but when. The twilight of the gods was certain, and with it the fire, the flood, and the breaking of worlds. Yet in the telling there was strength, for men and gods alike knew this. Fate cannot be avoided, but it can be met with defiance. And in that defiance lies the heart of Viking mythology, to fight though the end is written. The end did not come in silence, but with a roar that shook every root of Yggdrasil. Ragnarök began as the omens foretold, not with a single blow, but with fire, frost, and fury loosed upon the 9 realms. From the north came Fimbulwinter's last breath, a cold so bitter that even Viking food spoiled on the hearth, and Viking children starved in their mother's arms. From the south came fire, for Surtur of Muspelheim marched at last, his sword blazing bright enough to turn night to day, his flames devouring fields and forests alike. Between them, the world cracked. The bonds of doom snapped one by one. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, tore himself free from Gleipnir, his howls echoing louder than thunder. His paws shook the earth, his jaws gaping so wide they touched heaven and ground. Jormungandr, the world serpent, rose from the seas, his coils thrashing waves over mountains, venom spilling into waters that drowned both ship and shore. Nidhogg and his brood of serpents rose from Niflheim, gnawing at the world's bones, while from Hell's dark halls came the dead, marching in endless ranks under Hell's cold gaze. Naglfar, the ship built from the nails of corpses, cut through the waves, and at its helm stood Loki, unchained, his laughter sharp as blades. The giants, too, gathered their strength. From Jotunheim they marched, their voices booming like avalanches, their weapons hewn from ice and stone. Side by side with them strode the fire giants, flames crackling with every step. The ground itself split as Muspelheim's army spilled forth, led by Surtur, his sword of fire held high, promising to end gods and men in a single stroke. But the Aesir did not hide. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, lifted Gjallarhorn to his lips, and its blast thundered through all worlds, calling the final muster. In Asgard, the gods armed themselves. Odin mounted Sleipnir, his spear Gungnir in hand, his one eye shining with grim resolve. Thor lifted Mjolnir, his grip unyielding, his red beard bristling with storm. Freyr came forth with courage but no sword, for he had given his blade for love, and now faced Surtur with only a stag's horn in his hand. Tyr, one-armed yet unbroken, strode to meet the hound, Garm at the gates of hell. Even Freya and the Valkyries rode forth, not to choose the slain, but to fight among them. The field of Vigrid stretched wide, vast enough to hold this final clash. There the gods faced their enemies, light against shadow, storm against fire, oath against chaos. Odin sought Fenrir, knowing the wolf's jaws hungered for him. Thor strode into the sea itself, seeking Jormungandr, waves rising around him as the serpent's coils broke the horizon. Loki met Heimdall in fury, friend turned foe, each striking with hatred sharpened by kinship once betrayed. The clang of steel and the roar of beasts shook the sky, and even the stars seemed to tremble in fear. The Viking skalds told how the end would be. Odin would fall to Fenrir's maw, swallowed in darkness, while Thor would slay Jormungandr, but stumble only 9 steps before venom claimed him. Freyr would face Surtur, and though he fought with valour, fire would consume him. Tyr and Garm would slay one another at Hell's Gate, and Heimdall and Loki would fall side by side, enemies bound even in death. For the Viking man, this tale was not despair, but truth, that even the greatest must fall, but to fall fighting was glory. For the Viking woman, it was a reminder that love, sacrifice, and kinship endure even when the world burns. For the Viking child, it was a story not of fear, but of courage written in fire. Thus began Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. Fire and frost crashed together, giants marched, and the gods, though doomed, took their stand upon the plain of Vigrid. And in that storm of blood and flame, the sagas found their highest song, the moment where even death became honour. The plain of Vigrid thundered with war, its soil soaked in blood, its air torn by fire and storm. Gods and giants clashed, beasts roared, the dead marched, and all creation shook. Yet among the countless fallen, 3 deaths stood above all others, for in their ending lay the heart of Ragnarök, Odin, Thor, and Freya, the pillars of Asgard, each meeting their doom, as the Norns had carved long before. Odin rode first, the All-Father astride Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, spear Gungnir gleaming in his hand. His one eye blazed with wisdom, bought in pain, yet even foresight could not turn fate aside. Before him loomed Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, his jaws gaping wide enough to swallow heaven and earth. The wolf's breath steamed like fire, his eyes burned with hate, and his fangs dripped with the promise of death. Odin spurred Sleipnir forward, not with fear, but with grim resolve, for he had always known this battle would be his last. He hurled Gungnir, his unerring spear, but Fenrir snapped it aside. The wolf lunged, and in a single motion devoured the All-Father whole, armour, horse, and crown swallowed into darkness. The sky shuddered at the loss, for Odin was more than a warrior. He was the father of kings, the keeper of wisdom, the breath of order. His fall was not only death, but the breaking of the world's spine. Yet even as Fenrir's jaws closed upon Odin, vengeance stirred. Vidar, his silent son, stepped forth, strong as the roots of Yggdrasil. With one foot he pinned the wolf's jaw, driving his boot, strengthened by all the leather scraps of mankind, deep into its throat. With his hand he tore Fenrir's maw apart, ripping sinew and bone until the beast lay broken. Odin was gone, but his blood was avenged, and in Vidar the gods found one last echo of hope. Elsewhere, Thor strode into the sea, Mjolnir gripped tight, his red beard bristling with fury. From the depths rose Jormungandr, the world serpent, coils thrashing waves over mountains, venom boiling the waters black. The storm god met the sea beast head-on, hammer crashing against scale, each blow shaking Midgard itself. Thunder roared, lightning split the sky, and still the serpent coiled tighter, its breath a stench of death. At last Thor struck with all his might, Mjolnir shattering Jormungandr's skull, the serpent's body convulsing, its coils falling limp across the sea. Yet victory was bitter, for Thor staggered back only 9 steps before venom filled his veins. His breath failed, his body fell, and the protector of gods and men lay lifeless upon the shore. To Viking men who heard the tale, this was the truest honour to slay the greatest of foes, even at the cost of one's life. And Freya, bright god of harvest and peace, faced Surtur, the fire giant whose sword blazed hotter than the Sunday. Once Freya had given away his own enchanted blade for the sake of love, and now, when the world needed it most, he stood unarmed. With only a stag's horn in his hand, he met Surtur in battle. He fought bravely, striking with all the strength of field and sea, but no harvest could quench fire, no horn withstand flame. Surtur's sword cut him down, and Freya, giver of bounty, fell amidst the fire, his light consumed. His death was the death of plenty, the end of all growth, as fields turned to ash and seas to steam. The skalds who spoke of these deaths did so with heavy voice. A Viking child listening by the hearth would tremble, for even gods could not escape fate. A Viking woman would hear the sorrow of kinship, the breaking of families, the loss of light. A Viking man would nod in grim silence, for he knew that to fall with weapon in hand, to meet death unyielding, was the highest of honours. Thus Odin fell to Fenrir, Thor to the serpent, Freya to Surtur's flame. The mighty were broken, the sky burned, the seas boiled, and the earth quaked. Ragnarök was not only the twilight of gods, but the twilight of all that had been. Yet in their deaths lay the proof of courage, that to fight though doom is certain, is to live forever in Saga. The plain of Vigrid lay strewn with the broken bodies of gods and giants, beasts and men alike. The sky itself groaned, torn by fire and storm, and the earth split beneath their weight. With Odin devoured, Thor fallen, and Freya consumed by flame, there remained no shield strong enough to hold the world together. Then came the last blow, the burning of the worlds, the end that no sword could turn aside. Surtur, the fire giant, strode forward, his blade brighter than the Sunday. Each swing spilled sparks that leapt like rivers of flame, setting forests ablaze, boiling seas, and scorching the very bones of the land. The fire did not creep, it raced, swallowing all before it, until the sky itself caught, and the 9 realms were wrapped in a shroud of red. Viking men who had prayed for harvest saw the fields turn to ash. Viking women who had guarded hearths saw their homes consumed in smoke. Viking children who once dreamed of bright gods now wept as shadows stretched long, only to be devoured by flame. Yggdrasil, the world tree, shuddered. Its roots, already gnawed by Nidhogg and battered by the quake of war, quailed beneath the firestorm. Its branches that had held Asgard, Midgard, Jotunheim, and all the realms groaned like timbers in a storm, cracking beneath the heat. Leaves shriveled, bark split, and ash fell like snow across the ruins of creation. Where once it stood as the spine of existence, Yggdrasil now trembled at the edge of death. The seas rose in fury as Jormungandra's corpse poisoned the waters, venom spreading through wave and foam. Mountains crumbled into the surf, villages sank, and ships, both of men and of the dead, shattered upon the tide. Midgard, realm of mankind, vanished beneath the waves, swallowed whole. No Viking man's hall, no Viking food, no song of kin, could stand against the flood that swept all into silence. The heavens fared no better. Sun and moon, already devoured by wolves, left only darkness pierced by flame. Stars fell like sparks cast from a forge, vanishing into the void. Even the halls of the gods, once gleaming with gold, melted and broke beneath Surtur's wrath. Asgard burned, its towers collapsing into ruin, its feasts turned to smoke and cinder. Yet within this ruin was not only ending, but cleansing. Fire devoured corruption as much as life, and flood washed away what fire could not consume. The Skalds said that Ragnarök was not death alone, but renewal. Just as Ymir's corpse gave rise to the first world, so too would this burning clear the way for another dawn. But for those who stood upon the plain, for those who felt the heat of Surtur's sword and the flood of Jormungandra's venom, there was no comfort in such prophecy. There was only the knowledge that all they had known, all they had loved, was ending. The Skalds spoke of silence, that followed a silence deeper than Ginnungagap, the void before creation. No sound of axe or hammer, no laughter of gods, no cry of Viking child at play, only the crackling of fire as it consumed the last root, the hiss of waves as they smothered the land, the groan of a world collapsing into nothing. Thus ended the 9 realms, not with mercy, but with fire and flood. The branches of Yggdrasil burned, the seas swallowed the earth, and the fire cleansed all that had been. Yet even as ash fell, and water closed over stone, fate stirred still, for from ruin comes seed, and from silence comes song. The burning of the worlds was not the final word, but the breath before a new dawn. When fire and flood had finished their ruin, when the branches of Yggdrasil lay blackened, and the seas smothered the land, there fell a silence deeper than any before. The 9 realms were no more. Asgard had crumbled, Midgard had drowned, Jotunheim had burned, and even the sky itself was ash. Yet from that silence, from the ruin and the smoke, stirred the first breath of renewal. For Ragnarök was not only the twilight of the gods, it was also the dawn of what lay beyond. From the sea's foam rose the earth again, green and young, its fields bright, where once there had been only scorched stone. Rivers ran clear, mountains lifted their heads from the deep, and forests spread with fresh leaves. The sun, though devoured, was not gone forever. Her daughter, as radiant as her mother, rose into the sky, lighting the new world with a gentler glow. Where once the heavens had cracked with fire, now they shone with promise, and the air held the quiet of beginnings. Among the gods, not all were lost. Balder, the beautiful, returned from hell's cold halls, shining brighter than before, his light no longer doomed to sorrow. With him came Hother, his brother who had slain him unwittingly, now forgiven, and together they walked in peace across the reborn earth. Vidar, silent avenger of Odin, and Vali, fierce and steadfast, survived as well, bearing the strength of those who had fallen. From Thor's line came Modi and Magni, who carried their father's hammer, Mjolnir, the symbol of protection and might. Though the Allfather was gone, though Thor's roar no longer thundered in the storm, their children bore their memory into the new age. And mankind too was not extinguished. From the shelter of Yggdrasil's trunk, two humans emerged, Lif and Lifthrasir, whose names meant life and eager for life. They had hidden through the fire and flood in the hollow of the world tree, drinking morning dew, waiting for the storm to pass. Now they stepped into the dawn, their eyes wide with wonder at the reborn earth. From them would come a new race of men, to walk Midgard's fields and raise again the halls, to eat and drink, to sing and toil, to love and war as their ancestors had. To the Viking man listening by the hearth, this was the promise that though gods might fall, mankind would endure. To the Viking woman, it was the hope that even after loss and fire, children would laugh again. The Skald said that in this new world, the fields bore crops without sowing, the earth gave freely without plough or toil. Viking food would no longer be wrestled from frozen ground, but rise by the earth's own will, a gift to men. Yet still, the shadow of fate lingered, for even in renewal lay the memory of loss. The sagas told that Nidhogg, the dragon, yet flew from the roots of Yggdrasil with corpses in his claws, a reminder that strife never dies fully, but waits in shadow. Still, the new dawn stood bright, the gods who remained would rule in peace, the children of men would thrive, and Baldur's light would heal what had been broken. Though Odin, Thor, and Freya had perished, though Fenrir's jaws and Surtur's fire had torn the old world apart, the sagas ended not in despair but in rebirth. For every Viking child listening to the tale, the lesson was Odin Vili on Ve.